and said, "Hey guys, well, guess what? We've got a transfer."
He was my fraternity brother's older
Sacrifice that
brother.
the American people.
Prosperous communities have healthy environments.
Trust now. She lived in trafficking for 4 years. I really felt, for a lot of reasons, I felt for him, but I didn't have the guts to stand up.
In recent years, Pensacola has been celebrated for its downtown waterfront and lively Palafox Street. But in the mid-2000s, today's version of downtown was nothing more than a dream wrapped in a nightmare. On the heels of the devastation caused by Hurricane Ivan, it was time for change, but not without one whale of a fight. In his new book, Right Idea, Right Time, The Fight for Pensacola's Maritime Park, author and journalist Rick Outzen chronicles how Pensacola began its journey to become more than just a sleepy southern city. We welcome Rick Outzen to Conversations. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, great. Always great to be with you, Jeff.
Well, I'm excited about this book. I'm so glad you decided to do this, but let me ask you this. Why did you decide to do it?
Well, it was 20 years ago. We were in the middle of this fight, and I felt like no one's ever really told the story from behind the scenes. And there's so many lessons in this that I think we don't need to forget, because I think as we go on and continue to go on this trajectory that we're on, we've got to remember how easy it is to stumble. And so it was fun to do. Did a lot of interviews, went through the archives of the News Journal, our archives at In Weekly, found blog posts that I thought I'd lost, and just took about 18 months to be able to put this together.
You know, when I think back about it, and I'm not just saying this to
go ahead,
flower you
please,
up or whatever, but you know, you're probably maybe the only journalist that has consistently, you know, because in the newspaper and television and whatnot, that people have changed over the years, and that has kind of consistently followed that trajectory of what it was like before this whole development revolution started. You know, and so getting your perspective on it kind of gives us I guess a historical context. When you think, have you thought about it like that?
A little bit, and that's what really sort of drug me. The more I started doing the digging and putting it together, I just started to remember what a different time it was. And you and I talked a little bit before we started the show. Back then, the internet was MySpace.
Yeah.
Facebook was more like a yearbook on college campuses. It was just starting to get to the general public. The number one opinion maker in town was a guy who had an afternoon radio show, Luke McCoy. Yep. On WCOA, Pensacola Speaks. The other big influencer was Mark O'Brien, who had a column at least 4 days a week in the daily newspaper. When you wanted to run a campaign or wanted to influence people, you had groups of people write letters to the editor.
Right.
And now we don't barely even have an opinion page in the daily newspaper. But it was a different time. And misinformation could, I don't know if it's worse now or not, but back then it was, you know, misinformation was a big part of all of this. And for us, as a struggling new newspaper trying to get a foothold in the community, this became our big issue. This was the one that we saw early on before. Really, we did a thing called the Ballsy Plan, where we took everybody's ideas about a ballpark and moving the sewage plant and Maritime Museum, and just sat down with David Alsop with Sam Marshall Architects and sketched out where it would go downtown. And not everything happened exactly like we thought it would, but a lot of it did. Yeah. And it was trying to change us, get us out of the doldrums, and get us to where we could be something bigger.
I want to talk a little bit so people have context from your perspective. So you're the publisher of N Weekly. When did you start that publication?
Started July, very first issue was July 1st, 1999.
Okay, 1999. And you were doing things differently. I mean, you kind of had on a weekly basis. I used to always love to read, and I forgot what about the politics. What was going on with politics?
Oh, we did a little different version of Buzz.
Yeah.
Winners and losers. We were the first. You know, we would pick winners and losers every week. Yeah, and we had to have an edge. We were
Right.
a lot more punk. I'm not nearly as punk as I used to be.
Right. That's a good way to put it, edge, because you
Yeah,
did have
yeah,
more of an
right.
edge.
Well, we
Yeah,
did.
yeah,
You know, the News Journal had pelicans. We did pink flamingo statues.
Right.
We did. We were all constantly trying to think outside the box and be fun and be taken seriously as a news source. And it was a juggling act in trying to find that voice. And really, coming out of Ivan, we found our voice. And I think that's where we really started to take off.
How did Hurricane Ivan change the mentality of citizens?
You know, a couple things happened. I think one is that we had kind of, as a community, didn't want to recognize how far we were slipping as a community. I think that we saw 4 of our county commissioners get indicted, and we are the most corrupt county in the state of Florida. We're seeing an idea for this piece of property originally was call it the Trillium Project.
Yep.
And it was going to be a new Bayfront auditorium there. And for the first time in the city's history, the citizens had a referendum and overturned the city council's vote on something. That had never happened in the city's history. So it had emboldened the citizens to speak out more. Ivan hits us, and it's like pulling the veneer off a piece of furniture and realizing that it's plywood. You know, it's particle board.
Right.
It's not real wood. And we saw all these roofs, all the poverty, all the how hard it was going to be to build back. And what happened was we ended up with the only thing comparable to Ivan was Hurricane Andrew, early in South Florida, Homestead.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they had rebuilt about 10 years before Ivan. And so they sent a group up here, and they talked about you need a community effort to get people back on their feet. And that's what Rebuild Northwest Florida became. Right. And then they said you need a community project, something to build up everybody's spirits, something that everybody could pull together on. And in Homestead, it was a huge youth sports complex is what they did. And here, city was reluctant to do anything because they'd really gotten their wrists slapped on the Trillium deal. Quint Studer was out there trying to find a place to build a ballpark. He'd been at UWF. Too small a spot up there, could never make enough money to justify itself. He needed something bigger. Admiral Jack Fetterman, rock star, that's what I call him in the book. Yeah. He wants a maritime museum that it would complement the National Aviation Museum. And those are 2 big projects. And really, Mordo Sullivan and Miller Caldwell both sort of got these 2 titans together. And neither one of them really wanted to do, Jack really didn't want to work with Quint because he didn't really know Quint, and he's got his own, he felt like he was pretty close. Quint didn't want to go on the Trillium property because he remembered all the bad publicity about it, but they got them together. And the great story that Mort tells is they're sitting in the room, they're looking at ideas of what it could look like, and he says Jack Fetterman acts like he's at a poker game, and he just puts his hands out, I'm all in. And from there on, that began the work. And it was, what should have been a simple idea still took 15, 18 months to get to a referendum because the core of the group that was against the Trillium Project didn't want anything on that property, really. So they saw an opportunity. Maybe they got a little bit of an ego involved because they'd done this once. They saw this as the same kind of fight. And what should have been a simple decision wasn't.
Yeah. What do you think their real pushback was?
I think they had been very successful before. Their concept, and they were pretty savvy in how they worked public opinion. Was it that, we need to have a public process? This was happening behind doors. All of a sudden, this is coming out here while we're trying to rebuild our community. We need a public process. We want nothing there. We just want it to be a green space for the community to come enjoy it. The other idea was, well, once there was some momentum that we needed to do something with it, then we needed to do a national bid process. We need to get, is this the best project ever? There were those that said it ought to be condos, because the best rate of return for the taxpayers is to sell it to a developer and make it condos. We had done our research and seen where downtown ballparks, minor league ballparks, were really catalysts for downtown. So we'd seen it at Montgomery, Chattanooga. It was happening around the country. And so we really felt, as the newspaper, we had already started doing our research. So we felt like this was a really worthwhile project, which is kind of why we did the ballsy plan to start planting that seed. But for them, I think it really was. And the other thing, we had a mentality that we couldn't do but one thing at a time.
Yeah.
And the most important thing in their mind was we had to move the sewage treatment plant. Yeah. Now, no one had complained about the sewage treatment plant for decades, but all of a sudden, that becomes the biggest thing, and we can't do both. We'll go broke. The city will go broke. And little did we know that both of them happened after actually the plant got moved first, but the pie got bigger when we built the park. And more people developed, more people now are living down there. The revenue for the downtown district is so much more than it was before. But we had that, that small man
Small
town mentality.
Yeah. I used to always say during those times that we just don't know what we want to be when we grow up.
Well, it worked for some people.
Yeah.
But I remember, we helped start Pensacola Young Professionals, and I remember some of those early meetings sitting with some of the young professionals that were coming. They said, well, we're really okay with everything. Everything's fine. We really like the town. I said, well, you work for your daddy, right?
Yeah.
And 9 times out of 10, they did.
Right.
Right. Their world worked.
Mm-hmm.
But for others it didn't. And but we've been able to retain talent. We're able to. I would imagine that D.C. Reeves would not have moved here after he got out of college. He graduated in 07. The idea of being mayor here probably when he graduated was never a big deal. I remember just recently at a press conference he talked about the big news when he moved back was Palafox got another restaurant. Yeah. That was the big news for downtown. Yeah. So how we look at ourselves now is completely different than we did back then.
Yeah, because you think about, and we can get into this later, but you think about all the things that are right now currently on, or at least in the on-deck circle, right? Of development downtown. But let's go back and talk about just kind of some of the fun, political and maneuvering, if you will, for lack of a better term, that led up to the referendum and some of the things that happened. Because I know you talk about like some of the ads that were run and things of that nature.
It was, I think there are 2 developments that really, that the opposition called Save Our City. That was what they went by. They really positioned them that they were going to save our city. And the other side were Friends for a Waterfront Park. Those were the 2 groups. We had never organized the young people in our community. Right. And I got involved in doing that because my daughter had just graduated from college, and she said, Dad, I went to Rotary and they say I have to sit in the back of the room. I can't, and Rotary was much bigger than it is then than it is now. And she got tired of being told you have to wait your turn. You just, you get to serve the food. You don't get to plan the meal. Right. And so I wrote a fiery outtakes about it in those punk days. And Yvonne Emerson was the CEO and president of the chamber. He said, Rick, you need to come. I don't think you understand what we do. So I went, and for an hour and a half, I listened to all their department heads tell me what they do. And at the end, I said, well, here's the issue, because back then the chamber had a 3-legged stool. It was the military, hospitality, tourism, and the other was economic development. And I said, well, my daughter's not going to enlist.
Right.
She's not going to go work in a hotel, and she doesn't want to work at a call center. And I said, you're not going to keep her here. And to Yvonne's credit, she said, you know, it didn't go over well when I said it, but most things don't when I say things. But she called me the next day and said, let's sit down and talk again because we need to figure this out. So we met, and I said, let's pull together 10 people and young people and see if they're interested in trying to put a group together. You know, I think when we were younger, Jeff, you know, the JCs were the junior chamber, but it was all male, and it fell to the wayside. I didn't want that, and I don't think that age group would have wanted it either, but I felt like we needed to get them a seat at the table. So we met with them. Yvonne and I shared our ideas. We agreed that neither one of us wanted to control it. We weren't going to do their charter. If they don't want to ever meet again, we won't meet again. But they liked the idea. So we said, we'll meet again in a week. Everybody bring somebody with them. And we did that for a month. And by March of '06, we had PYP formed. And they listened to Save Our City. They listened to Friends on the Waterfront Park. And they all rallied, we want to help build the park. And that became sort of the ground troops going door to door, working the precincts, that really helped get the message out. And I think that was a really big thing. And then the other thing was the blog. Yeah. And back then, every journalist had a blog. Yeah. And I couldn't figure out what to do with it, but I heard about this guy in Little Rock that had one. That was he'd gotten so controversial that Mike Huckabee, who was the governor of Arkansas, banned him from coming to their press conferences. Yeah, would not let him in the room. And I said, I want to be that guy. That's what I want. So we were up there for a meeting, Dwayne and I, Escobedo, my editor, and I hunted him down. And I said, how do you do this? And he says, Rick, you post all the time. You know, everything you get, every news tip, every buzz, and you do at least 3 times a day. First thing in the morning, right around noon, so they'll talk about you during lunch, and then at the end of the day. Yeah. And he said, you do it every day, eventually you'll get something really big. And that something really big was the Maritime Park. And here we are 20 years later on just that. And the blog is still, it's called, it's Rick's blog, but you could, pretty much anywhere in town, you say the blog, everybody knows what it is.
Yeah, and again, I mean, it's a go-to. I mean, I look at it a couple times a day, just
to
see what's going on. get caught up. And what I find myself doing, just talking about how media has changed, I'll see something and then I'll share it with somebody, because I'll say, hey, I know so-and-so they'll get a kick out of this or whatever,
right.
When you were putting this project together, the book together, did you go back and talk to some of the people who were against it at the time?
I talked to a few, not as much, because I felt like their story was in concrete. And all I really wanted to do was focus there on, originally I was going to go all the way to when the first ball game was played, but it wasn't as interesting as this part, so I stayed here. And I had a pretty long list of people to interview, and then at some point, they all became very similar, and at some point, you got to start writing.
Sure.
So I said, okay, I'm going to start here. But back then, everybody was pretty vocal. The letters to the editor, we had a lot of letters to the editor too, from both sides. We had a pretty good feel for what the moment was like, and that's where I was focusing.
I'm just curious now if they've changed their way of thinking, or do they still think, it's a bad idea?
Well, Quinn has shared that several people have come up and talked to him and have been, that they didn't realize, completely understand the process. And there's some, you get caught up in the moment, and you don't necessarily think all the pieces through. Yeah. And so there's a lot of distrust out there. And I think the other part that made the blog really different and hard for Save Our City was I could respond right away. If they've got a letter to the editor, you know, if the other side wants to, you know, it takes 2 days to get it back in the paper, where that day I've got the letter to the editor and I've already broken it down into what the facts are. So we could do it so quickly that it became something that there wasn't anything like it to respond to. So that really sort of became the hook of the blog, and then you know, and then it's got my sense of humor in it, and that's where you mentioned some of the humor that, you know, Joe Vincent and the Appleyard Agency came up with Chucky and Dono cartoons,
Right.
you know, and that was sort of based on the old crotchety old man at the end of the Muppet Show, you know, and we debuted that on the blog, and then they ran ads with it, and I think they did about 5 different ads, and first time a cartoon had ever been used in a campaign. That was the first time that ever
Really?
happened. And that was Joe Vincent,
Yeah.
who is the one who put that together. And Dick Appleyard, you know, to his credit, really saw the advantage in doing something like that.
Yeah. You know, when you think back on it, and of course, if you're new to this area or you're young
Mm-hmm.
and don't remember it, but you know, you go back and, you know, that sewage treatment plant seems like a lifetime ago, doesn't it? You know, just all of that. And just when you look at what has occurred, you know, the development, which brings me to the question, where are we now? Things are continuing to be, I know there's something recently came out, the hotel development, et cetera.
Yeah, you know, it's been slow going on developing those other parcels. The Maritime Park, the museum didn't happen because the state funding had changed. We went through a recession, a real estate recession definitely, in the latter part of that decade. And so certain things didn't happen. We've been slow to get the right deals there, but there is going to be a version of a Hard Rock hotel there. We've got now partnering on the deal is Diane Hendricks. She is the richest woman in the country. ABC Supply, real community oriented, does really cool projects. Having that come into the community is huge. The Main Street sewage plant property is being developed now. That'll be primarily apartments, so that many more people will be living downtown. And then I think we've got the old Baptist property. What happens there, and that's probably a 30 or 40-year project. And then I'm excited about what could happen around the Bayview Center, you know, the Bay Center. What could happen there?
Yes.
Because I think that they're looking at doing some master planning and looking at, because around in towns now, those type of facilities are economic hubs too.
Yes.
So they've got to find a buyer for the hotel there, and I keep hearing there's a contract, but must not be ready yet. But then you've got areas around there that we could do more with. So I think that's another exciting part. So we'll see. But downtown still has room to grow.
Yeah, no question. Tell me a little bit about what's going on with you. Of course, we've got the book, and what people may or may not realize is that you also have a series of non-fiction books. Or
Fiction books.
I'm sorry,
right,
fiction
for me
books.
to do non-fiction. People say I write fiction all the time.
Misspoke here. Yeah, a series of fiction books, Walker Holmes.
Right.
So are you continuing on with that?
I am, and I'm in the rewrite stage of the 3rd book. I took time off to do this. But it motivated me to go back and finish that, and I'm excited about it. It is, you know, Walker Holmes is an alter ego for me, and I enjoy with him because he's always doing the wrong thing and getting beat up. And people like that. I think they like Walker Holmes getting beat up. But that's there. The podcast, We Don't Color on the Dog, is doing well. Yeah. I interviewed your daughter, which was great.
Thank you.
It's news as well as just, you know, somebody comes across my computer and I say, what? I really want to talk to them. Yeah. So it's been fun to do it. The blog and the paper are just doing really well. And the newspaper gods have been good to me. We seem to be in the middle of a whole lot of stories, and they seem to keep coming. And, you know, I wake up every Sunday and say, what in the world am I going to write about this week? And by 9 o'clock Monday, I know it starts. So it's a fun process, and we've got a couple other things out there we maybe pull together, but it's been fun.
In about 60 seconds, what are you most excited about as far as our community is concerned?
God, the most excited, I think that what I'm excited about right now is I really feel that we have got good leadership at the city and the county. And for the first time, I feel like everyone doesn't have to agree all the time, and that would be very boring. There'd be no news. But I feel like we've got a lot of pistons working on the engine now, and I think that excites me.
Rick Outzen, thank you.
Oh, always.
The name of the book, Right Idea, Right Time, The Fight for Pensacola's Maritime Park. And the author is Rick Outzen, who also has the Inn Weekly and, of course, Rick's blog. And he also has the Walker Home series, which is a fiction series. Great writer, and probably I'd be hard-pressed to name anybody who has their finger on the pulse of what's going on in Pensacola and Northwest Florida more so than Rick, and especially over an extended period of time. We're talking multi-decades now.
Thank you. I had brown hair.
Thank you, my friend. By the way, you can catch this and many more of our conversations online at wsre.org/conversations, as well as on the PBS video app and YouTube. I'm Jeff Weeks. I hope you enjoyed the program. Thank you for watching. Take great care of yourself. We'll see you soon.